we are actively tapping into that US innovation and just taking a small piece of it and transferring the effective amount over to the hub and their regional partners, and in the end, with a 3 to 5 year project, which we call a service, then having long-term impact through capacity building in that region. Next slide. And we work in what we call service areas for them: agriculture and food security, water and disasters, land use and ecosystems, and weather and climate. And we use the term service, and next slide. I want to talk a little, before I hand it over to the speakers, I want to talk a little bit of the idea of a service, because we're not a product delivery project. So an example of a product delivery project, maybe a hub would find that Cambodia wants a drought forecasting system. And then on the US side, we have a bunch of scientists create it and then send a link over to Cambodia and say, here's your drought forecasting system. We don't do that. That wouldn't be an effective way to work. And you can really see, if you look at our service components, the blending of NASA expertise and US aid expertise in how we develop a service, the components of a service. So it includes capacity building, engagement, data, products, handoffs, and sustainability planning. So that's essentially, that package and that plan over a 3 to 5 year period is how we develop a long-term sustainable service. And a service has to be needs-based, right? Somebody has to be buying into it on the other end. And so we work with the hubs to understand what those needs are. We tailor the services collectively, and we have a theory of change to monitor progress and learning to have that flexibility as we develop and implement a service. And finally, co-creation. I mean, we can cover that map green, that we work globally, but we really have a very small amount of money. So the co-creation process for us is about efficiency. It's about knowing where SERVIR's value added is whenever we're sitting at a table, and we know where all of our partners' value added is, and to find those opportunities for sort of multiplying effects, because satellite data is often a small piece, but there are places where we can use that to have big multiplying effects. So our toolkit is a process to find those opportunities, to communicate our value added, to understand the value added of our partners, and to have a plan to build that capacity and achieve those longer term goals. Next slide. So I'm going to, after introducing SERVIR and the idea of a service, I'm going to pass it over to our colleagues. Dan Irwin is going to talk about a little more about the motivation for our toolkit. He's the SERVIR Global Program Manager. Then Catherine Casey is who's our knowledge management lead on the SERVIR support team side, is going to present the toolkit itself. And then, as I mentioned before, we have hub representatives, Anastasia and Farouk, who are going to talk about over the past year of implementing the toolkit, what their experiences are, and how it's worked for them. And then we'll have a question and answer period after that, so please text any questions in. And with that, I will hand it over to Dan.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Next slide, please. So I would argue that right now we actually live in the golden age of Earth observations. A few years back, scientists and researchers would often say, we need more data. But the truth of the matter is we have a robust constellation of Earth-observing satellites, NASA, NOAA, the Europeans, the Japanese, Earth-observing platforms and satellites from multiple countries around the world, and an ever-growing list of high-resolution commercial satellites. Next, please. But despite all of these new satellites and sensors, one of the real challenges is bridging that gap between the science and end-user needs to make the satellite data useful and ultimately part of sustainable services that run in country or in region of the area that we're working in, like what Kevin was talking about. And people often try to fill this gap between science and end-user needs by creating these products or data products or online tools or decision support systems. Next, please. But the truth of the matter is that there's a graveyard of decision support tools out there. You can really just go to the internet and search, and really for every one that works, you'll find probably 9 or more in that graveyard. These products or tools, they're not updated, there's bugs, they don't influence the decision, you can't figure out how to work it, and perhaps it has out-of-date information, or the internet connectivity is too poor to run it in the place that it's intended to be used. Next, please. And you know, in the past, one of the more popular means of development and deployment of data products and tools is what I refer to as the throw it over the fence method. And this is accomplished where scientists and engineers or other technical people sit in a room together. It's often a PI-led project. And they come up with a really cool tool, at least they think so, that you know, they're absolutely convinced that it's really useful for a particular group of end users. And when they finish building it, like Kevin was talking about, they figuratively throw it over the fence. They deploy it. They send a link to the end users. And in some cases, you know, the end user was consulted early on to develop the requirements. And in other cases, the end user is literally introduced to the tool when it's received. So as you can imagine, the over-the-fence method is really good at making more tombstones in the graveyard. Next, please. So one of the other reasons we also see tools in the graveyard can be illustrated in this famous project cartoon. And you know, in the first block, you see how a customer explained what they wanted, and it goes on. I won't read each one, but of course how the project leader understood it, how it was billed below, how the customer was billed. You see the roller coaster, and in the end, all they really needed was a tire swing. And what could have been done, you know, and although the cartoon wouldn't really have been as funny, is deep co-development of requirements and ultimately co-developing or co-creating sustainable services with the end user. And through the Service Planning Toolkit, you know, we really walk through this process, and we provide different templates, and we try to define and document user requirements. And Catherine and the other speakers will talk about this later. Next slide, please. So my colleague Kevin Coffey came up with this analogy of what often happens and why so many tools and data products end up in the graveyard. And keep in mind, as Kevin said, the SERVIR motto is connecting space to village. And in this image, the astronaut represents a group of researchers who have a really great idea to impact development with a new data set, analysis, desire to create a mobile tool. And of course, you can see the village below, and the black hole that you see on the right-hand side represents the lack of use of products. And usually what happens is you've got this astronaut or the producers hovering over the village, yelling down, you know, I've got this really great product, and there's no real connection to the village. And what happens is by doing that, they get sucked into the black hole. And the problem is that there's this assumption that if you have a really great tool, that gravity is going to pull you down to the village. But in the world of online tools and products and data sets, you're constantly being pulled into the black hole. But the way that you fight that and not get sucked into the black hole is you have these solid connections or ropes down to the village. And you have the people in the village demanding that you're there, and they're rooting for you to not go into the black hole. And that connection really needs to be rooted in the users, and the ropes are your partners and your stakeholders. And strong ropes actually represent application of good development practices. And it's not, and this is NASA saying it, it's not as much about the technology or only about the technology. To be successful, there has to really be innovation in development as much as the innovation in science. Next, please. And you know, as much as we like it to happen, really miracles don't happen. And you know, we found that you know, to be successful, you can't just have a tool or a data set, but you have to think much broader. And in this context, in the context of co-developed services that start with these user consultations, look at what others are doing through stakeholder mapping, monitoring, evaluation, and learning, and a transparent and documented and agreed upon by all the partners co-development and delivery process. So Catherine is going to talk about the tool next and the toolkit, and then Anastasia and Farouk are going to give specific examples of how the toolkit and the service planning approach is being used both in East Africa and the Mekong region. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan. I'm going to describe the SERVIR Service Planning Toolkit, but before I do so, I'd like to illustrate where the toolkit plays a role in our service planning approach. So of course our end goal is to have a development impact. Now, what does that mean? We're trying to make a difference in the lives of people around the world, and we're working in 4 areas, as Kevin described: land use and ecosystems, agriculture and food security, weather and climate, and water and disasters. SERVIR's specific role is to use geospatial data to make a difference in the lives of these communities. Well, in order to do that, we need to have groups of users that are in a position to apply that information, so they have the skills and the knowledge and the capacity to take that information and use it to make a difference in communities. In order for them to do that, they need to have a goal and ways to measure their impact. They also need strong designs to put those goals into plans and that translate into action. In order to design those plans, we need to have an understanding of the users and how they relate, how decisions are made. Prior to all of that, we need to know who the stakeholders are, who our future users might be, and how they're related. Starting it all off is a clear understanding of the development challenge or need. So what SERVIR did was we consolidated our approach to these 4 actions in the center through our toolkit. As you know, we're working with 4 hubs and we have over 30 services. So with hundreds of colleagues and thousands of stakeholders, we needed a resource to go to that could capture our best practices in these areas so that we could deliver sustainable services. So our toolkit consists of 4 tools: consultation and needs assessment, stakeholder mapping, service design, and monitoring, evaluation, and learning. Now, these are not linear tools exactly. While we start off with consultation and needs assessment, that tool feeds into service design. Stakeholder mapping overlaps with those phases, as you see in the diagram to the right. And then through service delivery, we often identify new user groups or stakeholders that we'd like to consult. So it can be a circular process. Starting with our consultation and needs assessment tool, this tool is designed to answer questions such as, who are our key stakeholders and how are they currently making decisions? What information are stakeholders using? Where are there gaps in information or capacity? And how can we build on or complement other activities? It's through consultation needs assessment activities that we establish those key relationships that will be maintained throughout service delivery. This is how we ensure that our services meet clearly expressed needs and that we have partners to work with when the products under this service are ready for use. So we're thinking about sustainability of these services from the very start, so we avoid that graveyard of decision support tools. Our toolkit includes consultation approaches, so workshops, key influencer meetings, surveys, focus groups, and also resources for these type of workshops, so how to conduct a consultative workshop, sample agendas, group work exercises, and report templates for capturing discussions. Once we understand the need and the actors, we use stakeholder mapping to make sense of the complex landscape of actors that connect space to village. We use this tool to refine our understanding of the relationships and the interactions among stakeholders, how they work, and their decision-making processes. We also use it to identify where SERVIR fits into the process. So as you see in this slide, a stakeholder map from a frost monitoring service in East and Southern Africa, we have different shapes and colors indicating different roles of partners. Our toolkit presents a process for stakeholder mapping through multiple steps. So through this tool, we draft a comprehensive stakeholder list and we visualize stakeholder roles and responsibilities. Our toolkit includes tips for stakeholder mapping in a workshop setting, as well as sample workshop activities and guidance on visualizing stakeholder roles and responsibilities. Now that we know our actors and we understand how they work together and how decisions are made, we enter into service design. In this stage, we answer questions such as, who is the service for? Which stakeholders will be engaged? What decisions will it inform? And how will information be delivered? The goal of this phase is to unite our hub teams and users in a collaborative process to outline the service design, development, and implementation. Our toolkit includes a service concept template to articulate the service vision and how it will lead to impact, as well as 3 definition documents that specify the technical details and other activities related to various components of a service, including its products, data management, and training and capacity building programs. In order to understand the impact of our service and to learn through implementation, we have a monitoring, evaluation, and learning tool. We use this tool to create, collect, and report on relevant performance indicators, and to create a culture of asking challenging questions and having the evidence to support responses. This tool focuses on the theory of change. So the theory of change is both a process and a product that maps out in detail how activities and interventions will lead to impact. It's a process in that it's a collaborative exercise to systematically think through how to achieve a desired change. It's also a product. It is a visual representation of the steps and the logic behind them to achieve that change. Other tools in our toolkit contribute to the theory of change. So during the consultation and needs assessment process, when the hubs and stakeholders begin to discuss plans for specific services and the impact those services will have, that information feeds directly into the theory of change. And the theory of change is often initiated during our service design phase. Our toolkit includes steps to develop a theory of change templates, as well as guidance on selecting indicators. SERVIR's network of hubs adopted the service planning approach in June of 2017, and we continue to learn from the application of this approach. At this phase, we're interested in capturing some of the specific innovations taking place at the hubs, how they're adapting our toolkit to meet their specific needs. And we revisit our toolkit through annual reviews. We're also sharing this approach with other practitioners and are eager to learn from the experience of others that are using similar approaches. So for example, we shared our service planning approach at the Understanding Risk Conference in Mexico City as pictured. This webinar is also part of that desire to get feedback. And we're also hoping to organize a session at the American Geophysical Union annual meeting to share this approach with the community there. So SERVIR is already seeing some successes based on this approach. In West Africa, the application of stakeholder mapping is helping the team identify new users to co-develop services. In Hindu Kush Himalaya, we are conducting more inclusive stakeholder engagement, going beyond government partners to consider other partners that will support sustainability. And in both SERVIR Mekong and East and Southern Africa, service planning is helping to articulate a vision for designing and delivering services that build allies and demonstrate broader impact. So if you're interested in learning more, I've put the URL for our toolkit up on the screen. We have 34 services that have gone through this service planning process, adding 60 documents to our internal project database. But to really bring this to life, we have examples coming up next from our hubs. So Anastasia Wahome will be sharing the Kenya Rangelands Productivity Assessment and Monitoring Service, which highlights our consultation and needs assessment tool, as well as our stakeholder mapping tool. And then Farouk Chisti from our Mekong Hub will be presenting on improving agricultural resilience to drought in the lower Mekong region, which highlights our service design tool and monitoring, learning, and evaluation tool. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Anastasia.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I will highlight the consultations and stakeholder needs assessment and also the stakeholder mapping. And as Catherine mentioned, I'll be using the Kenya Rangelands Productivity Assessment and Monitoring. Now, we identified this service from a needs assessment workshop in October 2015. And it was including stakeholders from different thematic areas, but under agriculture and food security, we had 4 stakeholders: the IGAD Predictions, Climate Predictions and Application Center, Famine Early Warning Systems Network, Northern Rangelands Trust, and Laikipia Wildlife Forum. In their own words, they highlighted the problems they have within the rangelands as wanting to map the rangelands and forage conditions and not having the capacity to do so, challenges in accessing data, service water monitoring within the rangelands for the wildlife, and also they were aware of two existing efforts, one by Directorate of Resource Service and Remote Sensing, who have data, census data on livestock, and also ICPAC through a project which was mapping changes in forage, but they felt it needed improvement to give them the information required to make decisions. And there were other services or other challenges that they highlighted, but we prioritized on the rangelands productivity assessment and monitoring based on availability of data and capacity that we have within our hub. Next, please. Now, within the Kenyan rangelands, they cover 70% of the country. They are home to wildlife and pastoral communities. They depend on rain, and they are getting highly degraded due to changing climatic conditions. So through group discussions within that workshop, we specified the main problem as lack of timely information for decision making. And the four stakeholders highlighted some of the main decisions they make within the rangelands as development of proper grazing plans, managing livestock movements, conflict resolutions, implementation of conservation measures, as well as managing the scarce water resources and mitigating spread of invasive species. And they highlighted that the information they need to make those decisions includes vegetation conditions, the location of the service water for the animals, the extent of invasive species which are unpalatable by the animals, and other information such as administrative and conservancy boundaries. And we settled on one objective, that is to facilitate the near real-time assessment and monitoring of the rangelands. And through the service design tools, we came up with two major activities, that is development of a web-based tool that would integrate the required information and analyze it and be able to visualize online as a map, which would enable them to be able to see the wider landscape through different spatial and temporal resolutions, as well as capacity building, so that they would be able to understand the information behind the maps, as well as be able to use the tool. Next, please. So the Rangelands Decision Support Tool is the tool that we've been able to develop to enable the stakeholders to integrate all the information that was available and be able to visualize the outputs in the form of maps online. It's accessible, and it's accessible to all of them, and it's very simple to use. We've done several capacity building activities on the same, and we are still doing more as the demand rises. Next, please. As far as consultations and needs assessment is concerned, it's not a one-time activity. And following the first one, like I said, we had only 4 stakeholders, but they mentioned others that they work with within the rangelands for various activities. And we felt that we needed to find out what they were doing with them, what information they had, and whether there are areas that we could capitalize on in order to offer better services. And we did these through meetings and focus group discussions with the two of the key stakeholders, National Northern Rangelands Trust and Laikipia Wildlife Forum, as well as others who they mentioned as having integrations with and working with within the rangelands. And some of the two advantages we've realized of the continuous consultations include identification of new stakeholders who we did not know existed or worked within the rangelands, who not just realize that there's value in this service, but they're also willing to add more value to it. And also we've seen a lot of synergies when the different stakeholders together. And some of the examples that I can highlight from the continuous engagements with the initial and subsequent stakeholders include improving the online tool. For example, we were able to add fine administrative and grazing unit areas, the boundaries. We've been able to improve on our initial data collection strategy, where we only planned for one to validate our service water maps. But further consultations with the National Drought Management Authority enabled us to have a consultative exercise where the county officers by NDMA, who have a wider network within the counties which work in the rangelands, and they collect data on a regular basis. So they were able to integrate our data needs into the operations, so we are getting data more regularly and from a wider network. We've also been able to add more activities as the demand rises. For example, we've been able to assist management committees within 5 counties to digitize grazing plans, and this is through a new stakeholder called Kenya Rapid, which is under Partnership for Resilience and Economic Growth, project of the USAID also. And we've also had better stakeholder buying, especially within the counties, with some of them offering to fund advanced training from the one that we offered, so that they're able to understand better and be able to use the tool. And we've also had other potential stakeholders who are offering to, or rather requesting to have the tool, where they can also have their tool, their products being integrated with the current tool that we have. Next, please. When it comes to stakeholder mapping, one of the things we do is to list them and try to highlight what the role of each is. But as you realize from this list, it's a bit difficult to actually have it in your mind on who does what, or what role do they play, and how do they interact among themselves. But one of the other advantages probably I would want to highlight under service planning is that we've also realized good results or positives in terms of service integration. For example, the invasive species that I talked about, which is part of the information that the stakeholders would want to know, where it's located and the extent. We are getting those maps from another service, a separate one, that's also working in the rangelands, and that's something that we realized through our service planning process. Next, please. So initially we had just a few stakeholders. We had our first workshop with only 4 of them. They mentioned a few others who they worked with. And this is how our first stakeholder map looked like. And as you realize, the Northern Rangelands Trust being the center of action for this service. And apart from the interactions between the Northern Rangelands Trust with the rangeland management committees, and those are the ones that manage the wildlife within the conservancies, and the Laikipia Wildlife Forum, which is a forum for the conservancies, the linkages between the other stakeholders was just one line, meaning there were very few interactions among them. And we have a legend that we use to define the role of the stakeholders, and also the colors give different information on who a stakeholder is. Also, for this particular map, the size of the circle gives, at that point, we wanted to understand the role they play, or how much we needed to interact more with them. Next, please. So subsequent consultations, as you can see, have enabled us to discover new stakeholders who are not just interested in what we are offering, but also adding value to the service. And as you realize, the map now has many lines across each of the stakeholders, especially the Northern Rangelands Trust. The county government, initially we did not have any direct connections with any of the government agencies apart from the National Drought Management Authority, but the county governments we realized are also key players within the rangelands, and not just for the wildlife, but also with the pastoralist communities, especially those counties in the arid and semi-arid areas, because the main economic activity in those areas is pastoralism. And from this map also you realize that we have now been able to include the users or the beneficiaries of this service being the pastoralist communities and the conservancies. In this case we have the Lewa Conservancy representing the other conservancies. We have the Kenya Wildlife Conservancy Association as well, who make use of our online tool to disseminate information to their network. And also we discovered other players who enable or provide a better environment in terms of giving information or providing capacity to the key stakeholders such as the CETRAD and the IGAD Center for Pastoral Areas and Livestock Development. So from that we've actually been able to realize that service planning has a lot of advantages. And from this map I would want to say that with all these players, there's something either they're getting from the service or I mean it's a two-way interaction, and the buy-in and the uptake of this service continues to grow to date. Thank you very much. Next, my colleague Farouk will highlight the next part on the service planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Anastasia, and I would like to thank everybody for attending this webinar. I would focus on the service design and monitoring, learning and evaluation part of the toolkit by focusing on a drought service that we are developing right now. SERVIR Mekong, broadly speaking, has these objectives. And though these objectives were formed before service planning happened, I see that service planning can help in all these broad objectives like increasing capacity, improving awareness, advancement of these tools to users who actually need them, and then sustaining them with ADPC leading these services as a regional provider. And so, next slide please. Before service planning happened, when the hub was starting, we consulted 300 people across the region, and more than 130 institutions participated. And we identified these priority needs, which are quite broad, which is land cover mapping support, early warning systems, water resources management, crop yield forecasting. And as you can see, these are very broad. But again, with service planning, we can focus and meet specific needs of users. Next slide, please. By noting their demands, by understanding which appropriate tools and data that fill the gap through consultation, co-development, and of course understanding that there might be capacity building involved, and through proper clear communications towards outputs, outcomes, and a long-term impact. And underlying the service planning delivery is theory of change, as Catherine mentioned, which is well driven by the idea that you need to understand first and then bring about certain types of interventions. Next slide, please. So in the Lower Mekong, drought is intensifying, and what we found a particular problem in Vietnam was that due to limited rain observations and limited modeling capacity in Vietnam, which led to inaccurate drought forecasts and unreliable crop advisories, ultimately loss of rice production. The role of satellite-based observations, which provide greater coverage and provide greater data, and of course connecting them with the latest state-of-the-art modeling capacity, we have the potential to fill this gap. Next slide, please. And so we using the service planning approach and the toolkit, we mapped out key actors, which included Department of Water Resources and Ministry of Agriculture and Development. And regionally, we also had a buy-in from the Mekong River Commission. So with this mapping, we were able to identify key decision makers, implementing partners, users, beneficiaries, and special audiences, which again provides you that landscape, that view of who who needs this and where it can actually go, which is very useful and motivating for people who want to work in the region. Next slide, please. And so in terms of technical co-development engagements, we found Vietnam Academy of Water Resources, where we have 2 pilot sites in their provinces for initial testing. And with regionally, we have the Mekong River Commission, where we are providing all drought-related products by our service. And we are now providing technical support for developing their drought portal as well. Next slide, please. So in terms of the service concept design, the service concept template, which leads to this document, contains all aspects of the theory of change, which includes stakeholder mapping and needs and a plan to move forward. And it connects to these various documents such as product definition documents, training definition document, which relates to capacity building, data management definition documents, which is noting how much data use would be, which is a concern in developing countries. And for both MRC and Vietnam, we were able to bring together a broader service, which is, of course, we titled it as Enhancing Drought Resilience and Crop Yield Security, of course, noting both similarities and differences in that. And with these documents, we were able to work collaboratively with the NASA Applied Sciences team at the Jet Propulsion Lab to customize their proposed solution to each user, for each specific user, because we have, broadly speaking, MRC and VAWR, and each have specific needs. And in that, we, of course, found that this process is actually iterative and indicates it facilitates dialogue between scientists and technical people, experts, along with users. And I think that's where the iteration or iterative process happens, where we arrive at a good point where everybody says, let's move forward to the next step. Next slide, please. And this regional drought information system, as you can see, is fairly sophisticated, but it involves satellite Earth observations, based Earth observations, and connects to a coupled model, which is called the RIAS model, which is a coupling of a hydrological model with a crop yield model, whose outputs are tuned to what our users have requested into web-based services, which we have provided public access to, and we also have customized specific drought portal for our users. And ultimately, we want this to reach to the village, that is the farmers and agricultural departments. And again, this is done in co-development between a NASA Applied Sciences team and our users. Next slide, please. And so in Vietnam, our pathway to the village is facilitated through VAWR, where we have these pilot sites. And we have a pathway or an understanding with them that this will go to the ministry and then the Department of Agriculture and Resources Development, to ultimately to farmers. Right now, we're producing drought forecast maps, and we have conducted capacity building in this regard. And we are working with them to tune their drought advisories and rice advisories, and hope that with this approach, we are working towards reaching the end users, which are the farmers as well. Next slide, please. For the public, we have the tool available, and you can check it out at this site. It's easy to use, and you could not only display regionally the present nowcast condition, but you can also predict 3 months in advance various drought indices, and also do, the data is available from 1980 onwards. So this is now, again, on the SERVIR Mekong website for the general public. Next slide, please. In terms of capacity building, we have worked with VAWR and MRC, and this is a key component, which is again facilitated by the Service Planning Toolkit. When you identify that the user has specific gaps in their capacity to implement and to sustain this service in the longer term. So that's very helpful early into the game, rather than not knowing at all. In fact, next slide, please. And so we have had a very substantial uptake within a year, and this is amazing that MRC has actually taken our drought product. So this would be regionally displayed, and they have in their drought portal, and they're giving due credit to the Survey Mekong program, USAID, NASA, ADPC. And again, this is tuned to their specific needs and the particular drought indices that they want in collaboration with the NASA ASC team. And of course, with this, in this part of the Service Planning Toolkit, you not only monitor your success, but you also see where the challenges and where learning can happen. And this is facilitated by the toolkit. Next slide, please. So for us, out of this success and out of the various engagements we have so far, there's again this reflection on where the challenges are on various fronts, ranging from how well the model has to be downscaled to 5 kilometers from its initial resolution. The scientists have to think in that direction. On the capacity building side, how do we actually increase the level of co-development, where first of all it's training and understanding of the tool of the service that is being provided, and then how do we make sure that the user moves up that scale of contributing further to the development of the model itself. And so for the DSAT crop model, we still need to figure out how to get reliable ground data information. So all of this is facilitated through the Service Planning Toolkit, which and the approach which allows us to start with the users, understand the needs, and then put forward a solution or proposed solution that, of course, gets refined over time, hopefully, and fitted to what they fit to what they actually require. So. In closing, I would like to say that it's been a great experience, and I would endorse the tool for more than just Earth observations to other wider applications in development too. Thank you.